everybody. My name is Stephanie and I'm one of the librarians at Robin's Library. Today is the last Folktales story time, and it's Folktales from the United States. We're going to read one from the west, the southwest, one from Alaska and one from Hawaii. So let's get started. Have you ever heard a story about John Henry, an incredible strong man from the 1800s? Well, now's your time. John Henry, an American Legend by Ezra Jack Keats. John Henry. The night sky. A hush settled over the hills. The sky swirled soundlessly round the moon. The river stopped murmuring. The wind stopped whispering, and the frogs and the owls and the crickets fell silent. All watching and waiting and listening. Then the river roared. The wind whispered and whistled and sang. The frogs croaked and the owls hooted, and all the crickets chirped. Welcome, welcome, echoed through the hills. What do you think happened? A baby, a special baby. And John Henry was born with a hammer in his hand. Bang, bang, bang rang little John Henry's hammer through the cabin as he crawled about. What's that rascal up to now? His mother chuckled. And before she knew it, he was big enough to help her around the house. As he grew up, he did a man's work with his father. One day, John Henry thought, I'm taller and stronger than anyone around. It's time I went off into the world. He said goodbye to his mother and father, and off he went. He worked on farms and in cotton fields, but all that was too tame, so he got himself a job on a riverboat. One stormy night, the ship plowed through the darkness. Suddenly, the big steel rod that turned the paddle wheel broke. The wheel stopped turning. Smash went the rod through the bottom of the ship. Pump water, shouted the captain. Get to port before we sink. John Henry leaped to the paddle wheel crank. Do you see him leaping bravely there? He seized it, pushed and grunted and pulled. Slowly, the giant wheel turned. With all his strength, he kept it turning. Lord Almighty, help us, someone whispered in that long, dark night. As day broke, they sighted shore and pulled into port. A thunderous cheer went up for John Henry. John Henry felt a new excitement in the air. Men were talking of railroads being built from the Atlantic to the Pacific. They're going to lay those tracks over rivers, across prairies and deserts, and right through mountains. And through Indian lands and stampeding buffalo herds and badlands. Goodbye, boys, cried John Henry. I'm going to swing me a hammer of them beautiful new tracks. There's everyone working on the tracks. My hands are just itching to hold a hammer again, John Henry said. He tried one for size and laughed. It sure does feel fine. How he drove those spikes, singing to the clanging of his hammer. The men joined in, their voices singing, hammers raging and ringing, and John Henry's gang was in the lead as day after day the tracks moved steadily westward. And that sparks right there. Rising across their path was a sprawling mountain range. Its snow-capped peaks reached high into the clouds. We'll have to tunnel through the mountains, said his friend Lil Bill. It'll be awful dangerous. Could be cave-ins, someone put in. "That suits me fine," said John Henry. "Me too," added Little Bill. "Here's how we'll do it, boys," the foreman called out. "A couple of men will drive a hole into the rock. Then the powder men will put dynamite into the hole and explode it. The others will cart the loose rock away. We'll do this again and again until we have a tunnel right through this mountain. And it's going to be a real big tunnel, boys. Big enough for a giant locomotive pulling one of them log strings. Trains. All right, boys, blast away." 'Cause I'm working hard. Deep into the mountain they worked as John Henry's singing echoed through the tunnel. The powder men got ready to blast more rock. They filled a hole with dynamite, put in a long fuse, and lit it. "Run, men," said the foreman. They all scrambled back, ready to dash clear of the blast. At that instant came a great crackling and rumbling, and the entire tunnel trembled above them. "It's a cave-in! We're trapped!" There was no place to run. The fuse burned closer to the dynamite. John Henry was closest to the fire and to the fuse. He ran to put it out, but tripped and fell. "Ooh, I'm hurt bad," he groaned. "I can't get up." The fuse burned farther out of reach. Others rushed toward it, but they were too far away. Suddenly, John Henry remembered he still had his hammer in his hand. Down came the hammer, smack on the burning tip. Oops. The fuse was out, danger past. Sighs of relief filled the smoky tunnel. "Whew, help me up, boys," mumbled John Henry. Clearing their way through the cave-in, the men carried him to safety. John Henry does it again. Some days later, they heard an unfamiliar clatter. Down the tunnel came a group of men with a strange machine. "This is a steam drill. It can drill more holes faster than any 6 men combined," a new man bragged. "Who can beat that?" John Henry stepped forward. "Try me." He and Little Bill took their workplaces. John Henry gripped his hammer. Little Bill clutched his steel drill. "Check the machine," called an order. A nervous hand fell on the switch. In the dark, both sides waited for the signal to start. You see, they're in the middle of the tunnel. A hoarse voice counted 1, 2, 3. The machine shrieked as it started. John Henry swung his hammer, and a crash of steel on steel split the air. Clash, bang, clang. The drill got red hot in Little Bill's hands. He quickly dropped it and picked up another. Hiss, whistle, rattle. Men frantically heaved coal into the hungry, roaring engine and poured water into the steaming boiler. Who's gonna win, the steam drill or John Henry? Whoop, clang, whoop, bang. John Henry's hammer whistled as he swung it. Chug, chug, clatter, rattled the machine. Hour after hour raced by. The machine was ahead. Hand me that 20-pound hammer, Lil Bill. Harder and faster crashed the hammer. Great chunks of rock fell as John Henry ripped hole after hole into the tunnel wall. The machine rattled and whistled and drilled even faster. Friends doused John Henry and Little Bill with cold water to keep them going. Then John Henry took a deep breath, picked up 2 sledgehammers and sang, "Ain't no hammer strike such fire, strike the lightning, Lord, and I won't tire. Hammers like this, Lord, there's never been. I'll keep swinging 'em, Lord, until we win." John Henry swung both mighty hammers faster and faster. He moved so fast, men could only see a blur and sparks from his striking hammers. His strokes rang out like great heartbeats. At the other side of the tunnel, the machine shrieked, groaned, rattled, and drilled. Then all at once, it shook and shuddered, wheezed, and stopped. Frantically, men worked to get it going again, but they couldn't. It had collapsed. John Henry's hammering still rang and echoed through the tunnel with a strong and steady beat. Suddenly, there was a great crash. Light streamed into the dark tunnel. John Henry had broken through. Wild cries of joy burst from the men. Still holding one of his hammers, John Henry stepped out into the glowing light of a dying day. It was the last step he ever took. Even the great heart of John Henry could not bear the strain of his last task. John Henry died with his hammer in his hand. If you listen to the locomotives roaring through the tunnels and across the land, you'll hear them singing of the great steel-driving man, John Henry. Listen. The end. It's a rousing story, and there's a great song that you should look up about John Henry, too. Wow, an American legend. Well, now we're going to go to Alaska with the tale of the Yupik. And lots of folk tales you'll find all around the world are about food, and this one is too. It's called The Eye of the Needle, retold and illustrated by Terry Sloat. The Eye of the Needle. This is a very different place. See, there's that little hut right there. Long ago, on the shore of the cold sea, little Amik lived with his grandmother in a tiny sod hut. It was the time between the dark of winter and the warmth of summer, and there was little left to eat. Amik and his grandmother waited for the sun to melt the ice and for the spring breeze to send it from the shore. Then they could gather food from the sea once again. There's Amik and his grandmother. Grandmother sat inside the hut sewing with a beautiful ivory needle. Her eyes were old, but the wide open eye of her needle helped her see many things. One day, when Grandmother knew the ice was ready to leave, she spoke. Little Amik, I have been watching you grow. This spring you are big enough to go out and hunt for food for us. The next morning, Amik dressed in his newly mended spring parka and hurried to the shore. In a stream trickling past his feet, something flickered through the pebbles. Amik scooped up a tiny needlefish. I am so hungry, he said. I will eat this and catch something bigger for Grandmother. And with that, he popped the spiny needlefish right into his mouth. Whoop, whoop, down went the needlefish. A moment later, Amik said, I am still hungry. As Amik followed the shore, a squirmy hooligan fish flopped at his feet. He reached into the water and grabbed its slippery sides. I am so hungry, he said. I will eat this and catch something bigger for Grandmother. And with that, whoop, down went the hooligan fish. But a moment later, Amik said, can you guess? I am still hungry. Keep an eye on him. You'll see he's going to get bigger and bigger. A few steps ahead, noisy seagulls swooped over salmon in a little river. Amik scattered the birds with a handful of pebbles. Catching a salmon by the tail, he licked his lips and said, I am so hungry. I will eat this and catch something bigger for grandmother. And with that, Amek opened his mouth wide and down slid the salmon. But only a moment later, he said, I am still hungry. Amek hurried along the beach, eating more and more and more, but growing hungrier and hungrier. Soon he came upon a fat seal resting on the sand. Amek thought about how much his grandmother loved seal, but he said, I am so hungry. I will eat this and catch something bigger for grandmother. And with that, he lifted the seal, stretched his mouth open wide, and down flipped the seal. But within a moment, Amek said, what do you think he said? I am still hungry. And on down the beach he went in search of more food. Now, not far ahead, a lazy walrus slept on the rocks, basking in the warm sun. Can you eat a walrus? Amek crept up close. While the walrus slept, Amek grasped him by his long ivory tusks. Grandmother will be so proud of this catch, he said. But I am so hungry. I will wait to catch something even bigger for grandmother. And with that, he lifted the walrus from the rocks, opened his mouth wider than ever, and down wriggled the walrus. After he jiggled the walrus into a comfortable spot, Amek said, I am still hungry. Out on the water, Amek saw the prize of the sea, a great whale. Here was a creature with enough meat to feed an entire village for a whole winter. To Amek, the whale looked very tasty indeed. Amek watched the whale glide in on the crest of a wave. I am so hungry, he said, without one thought of his grandmother. And with that, he bent down low and opened his mouth to an enormous size. When the wave rolled in to crash on the sand, down rushed the whale. After a moment, Amek said, I am not hungry. Oh, he's a little bigger, huh? But I am very thirsty. Stopping at the nearest stream, he slurped swallow after swallow until the stream was dry. Then Amek took a long, long rest. When he awoke, Amek remembered he had saved nothing for his grandmother. Too tired and much too full to hunt, Amek plodded slowly back to the hut, wondering what to tell his grandmother. When grandmother heard Amek outside, she called, Come in with your catch, Amek. I am so hungry. Look how big he is compared to the hut now. Amek was very uncomfortable. But grandmother, my catch is much too big to bring through the door. Grandmother was sewing with her ivory needle. You must have returned with many things for us, Amek. Climb to the top of the hut and come in through the smoke hole. Amek knew the smoke hole was much smaller even than the doorway, but he always did as his grandmother told him. So he pulled himself to the top before he asked, How am I to squeeze through such a small hole? Now you can come in through the eye of my needle, she replied. Amek groaned. Grandmother, the eye of your needle is many times smaller than the smoke hole. But as soon as grandmother held the needle up to the smoke hole, Amek was magically drawn into the hut. As he slid through the needle into the hut, there was a loud pop. Then a rush of water swirled him around and around. Out came the needlefish past grandmother's nose. Swish! Out slipped the hooligan fish. Swish! Out slid the salmon. Splash! Out slipped the seal. Whoosh! Out wriggled the walrus. And they all flowed out to sea. Then with a great rumble out on the wave rolled the whale. Out of the whale came shrimp, seaweed, crabs, fish eggs, and even a whaling ship in full sail. When everything came to rest, grandmother said, "Amick, what a wonderful provider you are." Grandmother enjoyed a fine feast. Then she proudly shared their catch with all who came to see them. Amick did not eat. He was no longer hungry. The end. Well, that story of the Eye of the Needle reminds me of a poem. You might know this one. It's about a little fish. Here it is. Little fish, swimming in the water. A little fish, swimming in the sea. Oh no, it got eaten by a great white shark, swimming in the water. A great white shark, swimming in the sea. Oh no, she got eaten by an octopus, swimming in the water. An octopus, swimming in the sea. Oh no, what do you think ate the octopus? She got eaten by a great blue whale, swimming in the water. A great blue whale, swimming in the sea. Oh no, what? Who's gonna eat a great blue whale? He got eaten by a little fish, swimming in the water. A little fish, swimming in the sea. I hope that made you happy. That was funny. All right, last story. This is a folktale from Hawaii. It's called Pig Boy, a Trickster Tale from Hawaii by Gerald Mcdermott. Pig Boy. Pig Boy. When he was born, he was a hairy little hog. His ears were pointy and his tail was curly. His back was bristly and his snout was dirty. Grandmother loved this dirty little boy. She wrapped him up in soft leaves and sang him to sleep. You will be a little pig who roots in the earth. You will be a hairy hog who sails in the seas. You will be a tiny fish who swims in the ocean. You will be a wild boar who carves the mountains. You will be filled with magic. And if trouble comes, she whispered, just slip away. When Pig Boy awoke, he was very hungry. Sound familiar? He began to eat. As he ate, he began to burp. As he burped, he ate more and more and more. He had eaten all the roots in his grandmother's taro patch, and he was still hungry. Pig Boy ran into the king's gardens and stole the royal chickens. Uh-oh. The king and his men chased after the greedy hog. They found him in the middle of the forest. Seize him, the king commanded. Pig Boy squealed and became 100 little piglets. Then he slipped away. Pig Boy ran and ran until he came to the shore. He looked across the sea and saw Pele, the goddess of fire, perched on her smoking mountain. He hoped she would protect him from the king and his men. Pig Boy was rowing. Pig Boy was sailing. Pig Boy was flying over the waves, rushing toward Pele. But when Pele saw the dirty, hairy little hog, she shouted, "Swine, leave me alone!" She shook the earth. She filled the sky with fire and smoke. Pig Boy squealed and jumped into the ocean. He became the pig-nosed fish called Humu Humu Nuku Nuku Apua. Then he slipped away. When Pig Boy leaped out of the water, the king was waiting. Wow, what adventures. Pig Boy was caught. The king's men tied him up into a pole and carried him away. Snort, he grew bigger and bigger and bigger until he burst free. Grunt. Pig Boy ripped a path up the mountain with his bristly back. The waters rushed down and washed away the king and his men. Then Pig Boy got small. He ran to grandmother. She wrapped him in soft leaves and sang him to sleep. Pig Boy is a dreamer. He dreams of roaming the islands and sailing the seas and swimming the ocean and climbing the mountains. And if trouble comes, as it always does, he just slips away. The end. Well, I hope you enjoyed these folk tales from around the United States. I hope if you get hungry, you get lots to eat, and if you get in trouble, you can just slip away. Thanks for coming. Bye.